Act 1. Baked and Extruded Engineering.
Okay, let's dive into this, because when we leave traditional cheesemaking behind and enter the realm of extreme food processing with the cheese puff, the physics become utterly fascinating. You start by moistening a cornmeal dough, right? And then you force it through a die under massive, intense pressure. The exact second that highly pressurized dough hits the open air, a violent physical reaction occurs. The water inside instantly flashes into steam. This sudden pressure drop forcefully expands the structure into that light, porous shape we all know and love, and it sets almost immediately. And it's only after this explosive expansion that a coating of oil and processed cheddar powder is finally applied. Now that powder coating is uniquely powerful. Because it's been completely dehydrated, the fat and moisture that would normally dilute flavor in a solid block of cheese are just gone, stripped away, leaving behind heavily concentrated glutamate and salt compounds. But the real magic here is the delivery system. The aerated, totally porous texture of the puff dissolves almost instantly the moment it touches your saliva. This rapidly accelerates the delivery of those intensely concentrated flavor compounds straight to your taste receptors. It triggers a massive flavor response way faster and honestly way stronger than any solid piece of cheese ever could.
Act 2. Rituals of Peel and Pull.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that eating isn't just about taste, is it? It's a highly physical engagement. With low-moisture mozzarella sticks, what we universally call string cheese, this physical interaction is made possible by a very specific cheese-making method called pasta filata. Through a really rigorous stretching and folding process, the proteins inside the mozzarella are forced to align into long, parallel chains. Because of this structural alignment, the cheese doesn't just break or crumble when you pull it. Instead, it peels cleanly along its length into these highly satisfying long fibers. And this isn't an accident. The snack format deliberately exploits this specific property, turning a mild, slightly salty dairy snack into a deeply interactive eating ritual. That physical peeling process is just incredibly engaging, especially for kids, and it totally proves that sometimes the interactive quality of pulling food apart is even more compelling than the flavor itself. And speaking of rituals, we absolutely have to look at Baby Bell. This little, semi-soft wheel has been sold in its iconic red net bag since the 1950s. The cheese inside is an Edam-style product. It's buttery, clean, smooth, a bit elastic, and very mild. It really doesn't challenge the palate at all. But honestly, the cheese is almost entirely secondary to the pure genius of its format. For over 60 years, that red wax coating has functioned as a flawless, self-contained preservation method, allowing for completely unmatched portability. Peeling away that outer red wax to reveal the inner layer has become this multi-generational ritual. You don't need refrigeration for reasonable periods, you don't need a knife, and you don't need crackers. The physical format of Baby Bell is its true masterpiece.
Act 3. Fluid Emulsion and Transformation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the delicate chemical mechanics required to change the physical state of cheese entirely from a solid block into a fluid dip. It's an instant delivery system for dairy richness and salt that perfectly coats whatever you dunk into it. Whether you're making a simple mix of cream cheese and salsa, or a complex queso fundido using slow-cooked Oaxacan cheese and rich chorizo, you have to stabilize the fat and moisture. Commercial queso relies heavily on emulsifying salts to prevent the fat from separating, making sure it flows perfectly even as it starts to cool down. But if you're doing this at home with natural cheeses, say an aged cheddar or smoked Gouda, to really build some complex flavors, you need the sodium citrate method or the concentrated milk proteins found in evaporated milk to naturally stabilize that emulsion. Without those specific chemical stabilizers, your beautiful fluid dip rapidly breaks into a completely unappetizing, greasy, separated mess.
Act 4. The Science of Frying.
Applying extreme heat to cheese essentially pushes dairy to its absolute physical limits. To succeed here, we really must treat the culinary science and the heat thresholds of these specific cheeses with intense reverence. Looking at two radically different approaches, let's start with halloumi. Thanks to a really unique combination of heating and pressing during its creation, halloumi actually has an unusually high melting point. When you cut it into thick strips and submerge it in boiling oil, it completely resists melting. Instead, it triggers the Maillard reaction, forming this absolutely gorgeous golden crust while the interior remains firm and slightly springy. But then look at battered cheese curds. Their chemistry is entirely different. The hot oil instantly sets the crisp batter on the outside, while the curd inside heats to just below its melting point, softening into a warm, slightly molten, yielding interior. But for those fried curds, there is one absolute non-negotiable rule: extreme freshness. Fresh curds, like the ones deeply beloved in Wisconsin and Quebec, are famously defined by their soft, raw squeakiness against your teeth.
But the precise moment they hit that deep fryer, that squeak is permanently traded for a flowing, heat-concentrated texture. If you try to fry a curd that's just been sitting in refrigeration for several days, it will completely fail to replicate the texture and flavor of a curd fried within hours of production. Anyone who has tasted the difference knows it immediately. There's simply no faking it. Returning to our halloumi fries for a second, the frying process actually intensifies its innate saltiness as surface moisture evaporates, while also adding a really deep, nutty browned flavor. And this is exactly why it's almost universally served with a simple squeeze of fresh lemon. That bright citrus isn't a garnish, it is a necessary chemical intervention. It provides the essential acid contrast that cuts sharply right through that intensified richness, instantly cleaning your palate and making every single piece taste brilliantly bright and balanced.
Act 5. The curated masterpiece.
Let's see how this builds when cheese becomes the absolute, undisputed subject. A proper cheese board requires a highly structured understanding of flavor interaction, moisture, and chemistry to actually execute correctly. A well-constructed board must walk you through a very intentional spectrum of textures and flavors. You always start at the mild, clean end with soft, fresh cheeses like a chèvre or burrata. Then you step right into the funky, earthy middle ground with semi-soft washed rinds, think taleggio or passas. From there, you graduate to the deeply complex, crystalline, and savory notes of an aged fard cheese, like a beautiful Comté or an aged cheddar. And notice the highly functional layout here. If you include a sharp, pungent blue cheese, it absolutely must be placed physically separate from the rest. You have to do this to prevent its active mold from transferring to its milder neighbors. And please, never mistake the honey, fruit, nuts, and charcuterie on a cheese board for mere visual decoration. They aren't just there to look pretty. They are entirely functional components. They are strategically placed there to chemically and physically alter exactly how the cheese tastes on your palate. They provide the precise spikes of sweetness, the sharp cuts of acidity, the textural crunch, and the supplementary fat that the cheese alone simply cannot supply. Every single bite you construct is a calculated chemical combination. Which brings us to a fascinating realization as we conclude this explainer. From the rapid, violent steam expansion of a simple cheese puff, to the deliberately aligned protein chains of string cheese, right down to the carefully calibrated acidity of a cheese board accompaniment, we really have to ask ourselves, is the physical engineering of our food actually more vital to our satisfaction than the base ingredients themselves? Pressure, heat, chemical stabilizers, and physical presentation completely and fundamentally redefine our entire experience of simple dairy. It's a powerful reminder that every time we reach for a snack, we aren't just eating, we're engaging with a beautifully engineered masterpiece of culinary science.